Hey everyone, my name is Matt. Welcome to my shop and welcome back to another Ask Matt where you ask me questions and I hopefully provide you with some answers. This time we're talking about machine maintenance in the shop, and for me, machine maintenance is not something that I do on a regular basis. I don't have a schedule and I don't stick to a certain interval time span to do those things, because for me and the way that I kind of do things, I guess, I'm not constantly running wood and projects through the shop at any kind of predictable rate. So some months might be using machines more than the others, and it doesn't really pan out that you could just say this many machine hours happen to happen every single month. So for me, shop maintenance tends to be a lot more reactive. So I've been sitting on and waiting to do a bunch of things on my machines because I wanted to make this video and make sure I have all of those things together so I can film it all at once. So we're going to go through and kind of do some maintenance stuff on the jointer, planer, the bandsaw, and the table saw. And we're going to start with the jointer. So let's jump into it. So on the milling machines, both the jointer and the planer is going to be two kind of areas of maintenance that I'm typically doing. The first is going to be for the cutter, keeping the blades or the cutting implement sharp, and the other is going to be to apply a paste wax to the bed. The paste wax is going to allow wood and things to slide over the surface of the bed a lot easier, and it does help to prevent rust. However, I don't really have a problem with tools or cast iron surfaces just spontaneously rusting in my shop. It's never been a problem. When I first started woodworking and I first started getting machines with cast iron tops, the biggest thing on the internet was to help prevent rust, you got to apply some kind of rust proofing thing or do some kind of rust treatment. And I did those to begin with, and then as most things in life, especially for me, got lazy, didn't do that for a few years. I noticed that, these things don't just start rusting, at least in my area. So I guess it doesn't really matter as much. That's going to vary depending on your area, but I'm in Minnesota and apparently things don't rust spontaneously here, which is kind of weird. So as far as paste wax goes, for me it's just functionality. When I notice things are getting hard to push across the table, that's when I go ahead and wax it. I don't need to wax it on a recurring basis to make sure I'm not going to have my table start to rust. So I will be doing the waxing on the beds, but first I wanted to address the cutter head. So this jointer has a spiral cutter head with these carbide inserts, and I've had this jointer now for 7 years. And after year 2, I rotated the inserts for the first half of the cutter head. For some reason I thought maybe it wasn't cutting as well or something, but in reality they were probably fine, because all the cutters out to here, these are all the original surfaces that have been on there for 7 years, and they are kind of dull now. So one of the things I've been putting off doing on the jointer is actually rotating all these inserts. I think what I'm going to do is rotate the outside 6 inches of inserts in one direction. I'm going to rotate the other ones that I previously rotated back to the original surface and kind of go from there, I guess. So when I think back to when I had first got this jointer in the shop, I had no idea how long these inserts or these edges on these inserts were supposed to last. I figured 2 years on an edge was probably plenty, and I should expect to get maybe 8 years out of all of the inserts. Clearly I wasn't experienced with the actual longevity of the edges, and there wasn't a whole lot of information back then about how long to expect each of these cutting edges to actually last. So I think in most shops, if you're not using these things every single day, day in and day out, you're going to get a lot of life out of these inserts. Now, when I bought this jointer, the main reason why I got a spiral head on this jointer was because my previous jointer had knives, and I always hated setting the knives. That's a critical part of jointer setup, and if you get those knives set wrong, your jointer is not going to perform very well. So one of the biggest benefits to upgrading to a spiral head in this machine was the fact that I would never have to set the knives, ever. Even now, as I'm rotating these inserts, I don't have to change anything. I can just rotate them and be done with it. So next up, to make things slide even nicely, once again, I'm going to apply some paste wax to the bed. This process is pretty easy. It's going to wipe on the paste wax, build up a film, let it sit on there for a few minutes and dry, and then buff it out. And I'll apply this to the entire bed as well as the fence. And now that the wax is dry, I can just buff this out with a rag. That is pretty slick. Onto the planer. So the planer is going to have a similar process to the jointer. First thing here is to change out the blades, and this is something that I actually do a lot more often on here. I have a 4-blade knife cutter head in here, so these things need to be changed much more frequently. I don't get 7 years out of an edge on here. These will typically last me anywhere from 8 to 12 months. I have 2 sets of knives, so when I swap out the knives, I take them in to get sharpened, and I always have a sharp set here in case I happen to need them. So let's get this thing opened up and get the knives swapped out. So getting here, I have a few socket head cap screws to remove, as well as these slide screws in the back, which hold the shoe to the dust shroud or whatever, onto the back of the machine. I pop off the lid. And usually the first step is to grab the vacuum and clean out some of the junk inside. Now to remove the existing knife, all I have to do is loosen up these bolts, and that will allow that knife to slide out. And now I can just pop in the new knife, or the sharpened knife. And as you can see, this thing is in here with some springs, so that's how the height's going to be set. That allows me to use this height setting jig. This will set the blade the right height off of the cutter head, and then all I have to do is just bolt it down. So if I push down on this setting jig, that pushes the knife into the slot the exact distance it needs to go down. It makes this process pretty quick. So on stationary planers like these, you have the option of using springs and using a knife setting jig like this, or you might have one with jack screws that allow you to pick up either end of the knife and adjust its angle so it's parallel to the cutter head. A couple of different ways of doing this. I'll take that out of the way and then just snug up these bolts a little bit. Alright, that's the first one. Now with 3 more to go. So that's about it for planer knives. I'll get this lid reinstalled, and then I can get the bed waxed. And to wax the bed, I'm just going to lower the bed down a little bit so I have room to get my hands in there, and just apply the wax the same way as I did on the jointer. The last thing I have to do as I'm thinking about planer maintenance is add some oil down to the lube holes for the feed rollers. And this is just some 30-weight oil. A couple of drops, should be good. So that is planer maintenance, and I'm really glad I'm finally shooting this video because these knives really needed to be changed. They are crazy dull. There's like no way you could cut yourself on these, but it's crazy how much you put enough force behind something, you can still cut stuff with them. So these I will set in here, my little box thing, and I'll take these in to get sharpened so I have a sharp set when I'm ready to change the knives again. So now on to the bandsaw, and this is going to be pretty similar to the last 2 tools. I'm going to be changing the blade as well as doing some maintenance that I've been putting off for this video. So the blade I have on here right now is more for cutting curves. I'll be doing a lot of resawing in my next project, so I want to put my general purpose / resaw blade on there. And I have a new one for that, but I want to get the blade off of here first so I can clean out the inside of the case. Now the bottom case of the saw where the lower wheel is usually pretty good, it's pretty clean because that's where the dust collection is, but the top cavity tends to build up a lot of little dust over time. It's probably been about a year since I cleaned the top area there. That's because if any dust is left in the gults, the blade, after it leaves that lower cavity, it'll probably be deposited in the top wheel housing. So just for general maintenance purposes, just want to get that cleaned up. So the one piece of maintenance that I've been putting off doing for this video is to replace the bearings, these ball bearings. So on top, these ones are still good, they still spin freely, but this is a bearing from the bottom part under the table, and this is, if you can see that, it's totally seized. Can't even spin this. And all three of them are exactly like that, so these haven't really been doing a whole lot other than bumping the blade back into alignment. The nice thing about these though is they're very inexpensive and very easy to get because these are the same size you would have for skateboards. And the nice thing about that too is because they're for skateboards, you can get them in all kinds of different colors and stuff. So I got these nice blue ones that are double sealed, and they feature some nice lightning bolts on there, so that should make these infinitely better than the ones I have on here right now. So although I only need to replace the ones on the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and replace all of them. These things are so inexpensive anyway. I got a pack of 16 for, I think this was like $10 or $15, something like that. So I have enough of these bearings to last me for a couple of changes, I guess. So I have a new one of these Lennox TriMaster carbide tip blades to put on here, and this is my third one like this. So I usually get the questions about these things like how long do they last or whatever, because it is a decent investment. It's about $150 I think for this saw. And my answer to that is, well, my best answer is you will likely wear this thing out before it gets dull. And what I mean by that is as these things wear, as the teeth kind of get worn a little bit, they might have a little bit of set happen to them, so the cut quality starts to diminish. Not so much the sharpness or the cut speed, just the surface finish kind of starts to deteriorate. And my first blade, my first blade lasted me 34 months before it was fatigued and snapped. So that one went out, and then I had this blade here, which is, I think this is like a year and a half or something like that. And with that one, I had a catch, and some piece of wood like got caught in the table. It bent the blade, so the blade had a bit of a warp in it, so the cut quality was poor, but it still cut just fine. So it's kind of interesting. Like, the only reason I'm changing this right now is because I have a lot of resawing to do. I have a lot of thinner, more higher tolerance resawing to do. So like with this blade, it would resaw just fine, but you'd have a very jagged surface, and it's not really a huge deal, but if you're going to be planing that board after you resaw it, you know, that's not a huge deal. But I don't have a whole lot of tolerance to deal with here. And on this project that I'm about to start, which is the sideboard, I'm going to be cutting some of the joinery on the bandsaw. So you want a decent finish off the saw for joinery. So I got a new blade to go on here. So I guess I will keep the old one as a backup in case this one happens to break someday. But overall, these are pretty good blades because you slap them on the saw and you don't have to worry. So now I can just go ahead and get the guide set. And one of the things that I find interesting about this process now that I have built a bandsaw mill is the difference between like the guide mindset on a shop bandsaw versus a sawmill. So on the sawmill, these guides actually deflect the blade and actually control it. So they're pushing on the blade to get it into the right position. On the shop bandsaws, the methodology is you bring the bearings like close but not touching, so that the blade tends to wander off, they bump the blade back into the right position. It's a blade. Now a table saw is probably going to be the least exciting of all the machines. I'll start off by applying wax to the top and fence, and then while that wax is drying, I'm going to go ahead and clean out the cabinet. This saw has a dust chute that puts the dust collection right at the blade, but it doesn't catch everything, so once in a while just take a vacuum and clean out the cabinet just to keep things a little bit more tidy in there. So lastly, on the table saw is going to be blade maintenance, and the biggest thing here is going to be just cleaning the blades. So you can see my rip blade here is pretty dirty. It's got a lot of pitch buildup along all the teeth, which is going to negatively affect its cutting performance. So keeping these things clean is actually really important. There's a lot of different cleaning products that you can use to clean off the pitch buildup on your blades. Talk to 10 different people, you probably hear 10 different people's preferred product for cleaning these things. I think more importantly than what product you actually use is the fact that you actually do it. I use a cleaning product that's actually labeled as a blade cleaner. I bought that as part of like a starter set thing back in the day when I started woodworking, along with some like rust protection things. So I've been using this jug of this stuff for years now, and it's been working out just fine. So all I do with this stuff, just spray it onto the teeth and let it soak for a few minutes before coming back with a brush and just brushing the teeth free of any pitch buildup. Once I'm done scrubbing, I'll rinse it off, and then I'll dry it off with the air compressor. So there we go, blades all clean and ready to go. And the last thing I'll mention about blades is going to be sharpening. A carbide blade should last you a pretty decently long time. I typically send mine out for sharpening. It ends up being around every 18 to 24 months or so. It's really when the performance starts to degrade, and when you start touching the carbide, you can feel it not as sharp as when you first got it. The nice thing about sharpening is, for a fairly low cost as compared to a blade like this, you get essentially a brand new blade. I think these glue line rip blades are like $60 to $80, something like that, and it usually costs me about $20 to have it sharpened. The price is going to vary depending on the sharpening place you go to, and they usually charge you by the number of teeth or some kind of formula like that. But definitely looking to get your blade sharpened, especially if you're going to be investing in a quality blade, such as this, I guess, or any other blade that costs more than 20 bucks. And you know, depending on the blade and how much carbide comes on here to begin with, these blades can be sharpened a few times. This one's already been sharpened 3 times, so I guess I've gotten some pretty good use out of that guy. So that is the machine maintenance. At this point, I need to get started on breaking down my materials for the sideboard and seeing how these machines perform now that they're all in tip-top shape, I guess. So I have a decent amount of material to break down for the sideboard. I have a bunch of live edge 8/4 walnut that's going to get edged and then resawn into 4/4 stock for the rails and aprons of the sideboard. So all the stock is going to go through the typical milling procedure. It's going to get broken down and rough ripped to width at the bandsaw, flattened and squared up at the jointer, brought to rough thickness at the planer, and then I'll probably end up edging some of these boards at the table saw using that rip blade, which I just cleaned. So that's going to be the typical machine maintenance stuff that I'm going to have in the back of my mind as I'm working. Again, a lot of these things just kind of happen as I see them needing to happen. So like with the planer knives, when they get dull, then I change them. I don't change them at any given interval. Same thing with all the other blades and cleaning the blades on the table saw. I'm not going to clean those every month. I'm just going to clean those when they get dirty. So hopefully this helps answer some questions and all of that. So thank you as always for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments about machine maintenance or anything here in my shop, please feel free to leave me a comment, as well as I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Bug zapper's going. again. And until next time, happy woodworking.